but that ambiguity is certainly part of its appeal. As the British writer Oscar Wilde once quipped, "Give a man a mask, and he will tell you the truth." And that maxim seems to apply with special force to what we celebrate today, the public figure of Lightnin Hopkins. To illustrate, let us consider some of the words on a live recording entitled, appropriately enough given our setting here today, a song called "I Was Down on Dowling Street." This was a concert recording to a predominantly white audience, and it begins with a spoken intro while he's plucking cool little riffs on his guitar. He says, "You know, one time I was walking down on Dowling Street. That's in Houston. That's a nice place to go to get an education." His concert audience laughs on cue at Poe Lightnin's insinuation. Meanwhile, as conveyed by his always expressive voice, whether he was speaking or singing, and his nimbly plucked guitar, Mr. Hopkins projects the image of a slyly ironic hipster. But behind the congenial mask that he adopts in his interplay with his audience lies the face of a true Texas trickster, as further examination of those song lyrics soon reveals. The song actually begins with the singer belting out the line, "You know, I was down on Dowling Street." And in the second iteration of that line, he identifies himself as Poe Lightnin, and he confesses freely that he, quote, "didn't have a lousy dime." In the classic blues tradition from which he typically draws the structural inspiration for his improvised lyrics, Mr. Hopkins follows the A-B verse pattern and call and response format. That is, he sings that first line and then echoes his vocal phrasing with a burst of brilliant guitar. Then he repeats the first line, embellished by slight changes in the wording and the responding instrumental licks. Finally, he delivers a new lyric in line 3, which clinches the stanza and drives the evolving narrative forward. In this case, that culminating line of the opening stanza introduces an unanticipated twist in his story. He sings, remember, he's on Dowling Street here. He sings, "You know, a white boy come up in his convertible and said, 'Come on, Lightnin, we're going out and have a great big time.'" At this point, the live audience laughs again, amused by what sounds like the start of a cross-cultural adventure similar to the mismatched buddies motif so common in Hollywood films. The comic tone continues through the next stanza, in which the younger white man, with the ready encouragement of Poe Lightnin, shows off by punching his car's accelerator, and the unlikely duo proceeds to joyride across Houston. But suddenly, the tale's antagonist emerges in the form of a white police officer who pulls over the speeding car. The lyrics go on to relate how this cop character then grills, insults, and tries to intimidate them. As he does so, the easygoing, humorous vibe that defines the start of this story song begins to fade, giving way to some grim realities that Mr. Hopkins and surely other of his Dowling Street peers knew all too well. He eventually sings, "I was sitting here quiet. I said, 'Why do you white folks keep picking on me?' And he said, that's the cop, 'Get out of here, boy. Ain't gonna allow you to ride no more.'" At this stage in the recording, the audience is no longer chuckling with amusement. The Poe Lightnin persona is now candidly divulging uncomfortable truths. Mr. Hopkins then sings a heartbreaking passage that gives way to nonverbal testifying. He sings, "You know, that embarrassed me and my partner. I couldn't ride no more in his Ford. And we cried together. I'd say," at which time the musician simply lets his guitar explain, cutting loose in a poignantly weeping solo that conveys a wounded yet defiantly unbowed soul, a weary frustration with what Mr. Hopkins in another song describes as a world in a tangle. Following the first round of this powerful instrumental declamation, the singer sighs one more short line, simply this, "And I called my mama," I'd say, followed by more evocative guitar work. He makes it moan bawl, and scream, articulating via sound a profound sense of hurt and humiliation. Yet it also communicates the player's defiant creativity, his capacity, informed by a combination of string building skill and intuition, to improvise art out of pain, a pain that is at once both intensely personal and socially shared. And the expression of that kind of truth in this song and countless others, the mask of Poe Lightnin is less a disguise than a mechanism for telling it like it is. As such, it speaks not just for one man who years ago walked down Dowling Street, but for all of us, for it reveals some of the fundamental realities of the human condition. Lightnin Hopkins was a true artist, arguably one of the most famous and enduring ever to come out of Houston, musical or otherwise. Given the universality of his themes and sounds, by the time of his death, his persona was known and admired around the world. Thus, he has been, and to this day continues to be, enjoyed as well as written about and analyzed in various languages among many admirers from disparate places all over planet Earth. Yet even the most distant of them realize via his songs that Lightnin Hopkins had a special relationship with Houston, Texas, and particularly with this very neighborhood. In the current issue of a magazine published in Paris, France, a magazine called Soul Bag, a writer asserts this, excuse my poor French: Il faut avoir vu Lightnin Hopkins dans le third ward de Houston pour connaître le vrai Lightnin. That is, it is necessary to have seen Lightnin Hopkins in the third ward of Houston to know the true Lightnin. With that insight in mind, we may regret that we can no longer see and hear this icon of the blues performing live in this community. However, just as the true Lightnin flashed most brilliantly in the context of his home turf of Third Ward, the like-minded residents of Third Ward, and by extension those of Houston and Harris County, can now shine brightly with pride in the lasting achievement, the absolute artistry of our former fellow citizen. Yes, Mr. Hopkins, we do remember you. We salute you and your blues. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, here comes my shameless plug for Roger. Down in Houston, you must own this book. Alan, you must own his book. All right, I knew I was going to forget to acknowledge a couple people, but I also wanted to say Nuri Nuri's here from KPFT, and the lovely Mrs. B. Mansell Rubenstein was here. Unfortunately, he had to leave. He was a great friend of Mr. Hopkins. And I also want to let everybody know that Candace Price is here from Senator Rodney Ellis's office, who happens used to play with Mr. Hopkins also. Next up is Mr. Rick Lowe, the founder of Project Row Houses. Rick?
Good morning. As we sit here and call to memory the great Lightnin Hopkins, I also want to call another figure to our memory here today is John Biggers, because and I do that to place a context on this, because it was through John Biggers that I come to understand the importance of preservation and creating an opportunity for memory to be held. And that's how Project Row Houses started. When we started Project Row Houses, I had no idea at the time that we were positioning ourselves to be a catalyst for preserving some of the great Houston history. And so starting with those little small shotgun houses right down the street, moving over to the El Dorado Ballroom, which we were very fortunate to be able to have that in our control. And then realizing from that little that ballroom, realizing some of the great people that have come through this community and done great things. People such as Charles and Anna Dupree, in which it was built for El Dorado Ballroom, where many people perform there. And so we have a little park next door called Dupree Park in honor of them. But one of the things about Project Row Houses that's been really instrumental for me is being able to look at the work of artists and allow them to kind of guide us in terms of what we do and what we value in our community. And so I'm very, very pleased to have with us today an artist from Brooklyn, Terry Atkins, who let me just say this, when we got the El Dorado Ballroom a few years ago, and Roger worked with us on a series called